In the dimly lit courtroom, buzzing with voices and camera flashes, Cassie Ventura sat upright, her face calm, full of determined fire. Her decision to testify openly against her ex-partner, music mogul Diddy had sent shockwaves through the media. She knew dropping anonymity would make her a target for public scrutiny, but in her heart, she believed the truth was worth the risk. Cassie met Diddy in 2005, when she was just 19 and he was 37. At first, their relationship looked like a fairy tale: glamorous parties, luxury trips around the globe, rubbing shoulders with the elite. But behind the glitz was a much darker reality. Cassie claimed that Diddy quickly took total control of her life, pressuring her into drug use and forcing her to obey his demands. His violent outbursts were frequent and terrifying. She'd often hide out in hotel rooms, waiting for her bruises to fade. One of the most disturbing parts of their relationship, according to Cassie, were the so-called freak-offs, sexual encounters where Diddy made her sleep with other men while he watched. These nights were always fueled by heavy drug use: ecstasy, coke, GHB, ketamine, and booze. Afterward, she often needed 4 drips just to recover physically. In 2018, Cassie finally found the strength to walk away. She claimed that after she broke the news to Diddy during dinner, he stormed into her apartment later that night and raped her. That night changed everything. She knew then it was time to speak out. In November 2023, Cassie filed a civil lawsuit accusing Diddy of rape and years of abuse. The case was quickly settled, fueling speculation that a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, had been signed. But legal experts noted that even if she had signed one, it couldn't stop her from testifying in a criminal case if subpoenaed. Then, in May 2024, surveillance footage surfaced. It showed Diddy violently attacking Cassie in a Los Angeles hotel back in 2016. The video was a turning point: clear, brutal evidence that couldn't be denied. Diddy released a public apology, but his legal team insisted the clip was doctored. Now, in April 2025, Cassie was preparing to take the stand at the upcoming trial, scheduled for May 5th. Her testimony would be critical in the sweeping federal case against Diddy, who was now facing charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, and transporting individuals for prostitution. She knew the risks, knew the headlines would explode again, but she also knew her voice could empower other survivors to come forward. As the judge called for a break, Cassie stepped out of the courtroom, all eyes on her. She took a deep breath. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but somewhere deep inside, she held on to the hope that her story, raw, painful, and real, could be the spark that helped ignite real change. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. Cassie stood outside the courthouse, the spring air brushing past her face, warm and sharp all at once. Paparazzi flashes lit up the sidewalk like fireworks. People called her name, not just reporters, but strangers, supporters, survivors. Some held up signs. Some just offered her a nod, a hand to her shoulder, a whispered, "Thank you." It all felt surreal. Back at her hotel room that night, the silence hit harder than anything else. She dropped her keys onto the counter and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same girl who had fallen for a man who promised the world, only to take pieces of her soul one lie at a time. She ran her fingers over the bruises she could still feel, not the physical ones. Those had faded long ago, but the ones etched into memory, the ones that woke her up at 3 a.m. gasping for air, those lingered. Diddy had taken her youth, her choices, her voice. But not anymore. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from the DOJ's office. They'd be calling her to the stand within the week. The prosecution had reviewed her evidence: texts, photos, private messages, the footage from hotel surveillance. And her testimony, it was the missing piece. "Are you ready?" her attorney asked later that afternoon, meeting her in a quiet room downtown. Cassie nodded. "I've been ready. I just didn't know it." When the day finally came, she walked into the courtroom in a cream-colored suit, soft, elegant, but commanding. Her hair was pulled back, her hands steady. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Press, advocates, even a few people she once considered friends, people who had stayed silent when she needed them most. She sat down, adjusted the mic, and looked out over the room. And then she spoke. She spoke about the girl she used to be, the one who thought love meant sacrifice, silence, survival. She described the parties, the pills, the mind games. She recalled nights when Diddy would slam doors and whisper threats, only to buy her diamonds the next morning. She talked about the freak-offs, the control, the shame she carried for years. And she didn't flinch. Not when Diddy's tried to twist her words. Not when the judge asked her to repeat the most painful details. Not even when she caught a glimpse of him, sitting there at the defense table, stone-faced. She looked straight at him, voice firm. You don't get to rewrite what you did. I remember it all. And now, so will the world. Her testimony lasted over 3 hours. When it was done, she stepped down from the witness stand, her legs shaky but strong. As she passed the rows of onlookers, a few began to clap, not out of celebration, but out of reverence. Out of respect. Cassie didn't smile. She didn't cry. But inside, something began to lift. Not the pain. That might never go away. But the weight of silence, the burden of carrying someone else's crimes, was finally off her shoulders. She wasn't just telling her story. She was reclaiming it. The next few days passed like a storm she had braced herself for, but could never fully prepare for. Cassie stayed mostly indoors, surrounded by a tight circle of people she trusted, her mom, her sister, her attorney, and a quiet security detail the feds insisted on. The trial had entered its most heated stage. Media outlets across the country dissected her testimony word by word. Talk shows, podcasts, hashtag threads. Some of them called her brave. Others questioned her motives. But Cassie didn't read the comments. Not anymore. Instead, she started her mornings with silence. Herbal tea. Journaling. Sometimes she'd sit by the window for hours, just watching the city move beneath her, cars weaving through traffic, strangers rushing by, lives continuing as if the whole world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Then came the cross-examination. Cassie had been warned. They were going to dig into her past, her choices, her silence. They were going to weaponize every moment she ever doubted herself. And they did. Ms. Ventura, Diddy's attorney said, voice cold and polished like marble, you remained in a relationship with my client for over a decade. You attended award shows, traveled internationally, celebrated birthdays. Are you suggesting you were being abused the entire time? Cassie looked him dead in the eye. Yes, she said simply. Because abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it comes with diamonds. Sometimes it whispers instead of shouts. But it's abuse. The courtroom was still. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. She went on, unshaken. I loved him. That was real. But love isn't supposed to hurt like that. It isn't supposed to control you, isolate you, break you down. There was a moment during the recess, outside the courtroom, when she found herself face to face with one of Diddy's former bodyguards. A man she hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. He gave her a small nod. No words. Just something in his eyes that looked a lot like regret. Or guilt. Maybe both. That night, Cassie sat in her hotel room and did something she hadn't done in years. She turned on music. Not his. Never again. But something soft. Soulful. A little broken. A little healing. For the first time in a long time, she danced. Alone, barefoot, no cameras, no crowd. Just her and the beat. She didn't move perfectly. She didn't even smile much. But she moved. She let herself feel the rhythm of something that belonged to her again. Freedom, she realized, didn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it came like this. Slow. Quiet. Sacred. The verdict wasn't in yet. The trial wasn't over. But her silence was. And no matter what came next, Cassie knew she had already won something they could never take from her again. Her voice. The final day of the trial arrived under gray skies, the kind that seemed to hold their breath, waiting. Cassie walked into the courtroom like she had every day before. But something felt different now. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even hope. It was certainty. She had said everything she came to say. She had stood in the fire and didn't burn. What happened next wasn't hers to carry anymore. It belonged to the jury. The closing arguments flew like arrows. Diddy's defense leaned hard into the NDA settlement, into Cassie's silence over the years, into her so-called lavish lifestyle. They painted her as manipulative, ambitious, someone who had everything to gain. But the prosecution, they spoke of wounds that don't show. They spoke of grooming, of coercion dressed up as love, of the power imbalance that shaped every moment of those 13 years. They reminded the jury of the video, the texts, the testimony. But most of all, they reminded them of the truth of a woman who had the courage to relive her trauma in front of the world, just for a shot at justice. The jury took 3 days. Cassie barely slept. She spent most of the time walking through parks, down empty hotel hallways, inside her own memories. She thought of all the women who had messaged her. The ones who said, me too. The ones who said, I'm still trying to leave. The ones who had never told a soul until they saw her speak. On the morning of the verdict, she wore no makeup. Her hair was tied back. She looked like herself. Not the girl from the tabloids. Not the pop star. The ex-girlfriend. Just Cassie. When the judge asked the jury foreperson to stand, the courtroom went dead silent. On the count of sex trafficking and conspiracy to traffic under federal statute, we find the defendant guilty. A breath escaped Cassie's lungs, long and sharp like something she'd been holding for years. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Count after count. Charge after charge. And then the courtroom broke. Not into cheers, this wasn't that kind of moment, but into quiet sobs. Hand squeezes. Silent tears. Her attorney touched her arm. Her sister cried openly beside her. Cassie sat still, as if letting the word sink in, guilty. When she stepped outside, the reporters swarmed like bees. Questions flew. Microphones reached. But she didn't stop. She didn't say a word. She walked down those courthouse steps with the quiet power of a woman who had already said everything that mattered. That night, she sat by a window overlooking the city, the lights flickering like stars just a little too close to touch. She wasn't whole. Not yet. But she was free. And freedom, she realized, didn't look like escape. It looked like truth. Spoken aloud. Witnessed. Believed. The world had finally listened. And that was enough.